All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to our biweekly Sierra Interactive Mastermind. I am Scott DeRuyter, Director of Sales and Partnerships. And I am excited today to be joined by Brian Burds. Brian is the owner and the team leader of the Burds home selling team in El Paso, Texas. And a bit of trivia for you all, if you don't know, El Paso is in the mountain time zone. So that might come up later in our conversation today. So Brian, welcome. You and I had the opportunity to meet. I'll tell a funny story. We actually was in the middle of scanning some resumes, looking for some new AE positions, and I sat down at your table in the back of the room at the Sierra Summit out in Denver a couple of weeks back, and just introduced ourselves, very casual, right? Didn't even know you were one of our speakers, which is probably on my bad, right? And we wound up having just this great intellectual conversation of what the definition of working remote was. And it turned out, Brian, I just wanted to tell you, because we never had a chance to talk about this, you were actually right. The person was really clarifying whether there was travel related to the job or not. So anyway, I digress. So I was super impressed, as well as the rest of the Sierra team, with your content at this Sierra Summit. And I know not everyone got to hear this fantastic content. So we really wanted to bring you back onto our mastermind and kind of dive into these topics a little deeper. So welcome to the mastermind.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate it allowing me to be here.
That's great. So great to have you. So before we jump in, one last thing, we are going to get some polls started, because these polls I want to go and run through real quick are going to give us a feel for everyone's business today. And then I think Brian's going to share a little bit about his insight in his business. So Matt, if we want to go ahead and start off with one of like three quick polls we're going to do. So here's the first. Well, there's three questions, I should say. There's three questions to the poll. So number one, everyone on the call today, are the number of units that you've sold so far, say year to date, are they up? Are they down? Are they the same? Or maybe you don't know. So I'll give you that as an out, but hopefully you all know your numbers. Is your gross commission income, is your GCI? So I know your units could be up or down, but is your gross commission income up, down, or the same? Or again, you don't know. And then finally, which is really going to kind of what we're going to dive in today, is your profitability up, down, the same, or don't know? So everyone take a minute and just go ahead and answer all those three questions so we can kind of get a feel for where everyone's business is going right now. And in that time, Brian, why don't you just kind of tell us a little bit more about your team and about your company and what you guys are doing?
Fantastic. So I've been a real estate agent for now 19 years, and I've gone through every evolution of what people go through. I started as an individual agent, kind of got my feet wet on a quasi team in the beginning, found some success, grew, and over term decided, hey, right before I was about to have kids, I didn't want to be running the 14, 15-hour a day, real estate days that we have. So I shifted, made the move over into a team lead, brought my first person, epically failed multiple times, and finally found a rhythm in it, and grew it from there to today. We're sitting at about 40 people on the team, to equate a little over 500 plus transactions. And the intent there is that those changes have evolved over time to bring us to success. But I have found that I don't necessarily thrive in the easy markets. I'm successful, but I don't thrive. I tend to thrive a lot more in the difficult markets because it allows expertise to shine, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, kind of have to sharpen the tools in those changing, challenging markets, as opposed to when everything's just flowing. So then you have a traditional team and you're part of, I think EXP is the brokerage that you're affiliated with, and you
Correct.
run your team underneath that. And I think you shared with me at one point, and you kind of went through this really quick, but you used to run a brokerage, and that you pretty much decided that that wasn't the model that you wanted to run anymore.
Yeah, so I evolved into the basis that I was having success on the brokerage side. I was having success on the team side selling. But what I found is that I liked others winning. So I like to share where if I'm winning, they're winning. I think we're all winning. And I found that EXP was the model that fit that criteria, let alone some of the legacy brands were just charging outrageous fee packaging that my last year at the legacy brand as the owner of a franchise, I paid $180,000 in. To give perspective, that was just outrageous for me, and I couldn't do it any longer. So I made that decision to make a move into something that, one, I could help others, build others, at the same time growing and scaling myself.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for elaborating on that a little bit further. So yeah, so so okay, so if today, if I was to say to you, and we're going to get our results when Matt tells me they're ready, but if I said, hey, Brian, is your units up or down, what would you tell me?
So our units are actually about the same, but they've shifted dynamically quite a bit. We were a very heavy listing side for a long time, where we've shifted to a buyer side. Overall, year to date, we're down about actually 18 units. So it's not too bad, but it's significant in the long run. Commission dollar is up. So our actual commission dollar is up because the value of homes has gone up so significantly. So yeah, we're in that same transition where we had to look at the market dynamically different.
And then how about your profits so far this year?
So our profit went through a weird place. So we actually had a conversation about this at dinner one time, or while we were in Denver, is that the conversation is that our line of credit actually compressed based on just credit compression across the market. And Wells Fargo called me one day and said, hey, we're calling in your line of credit. And I was using my line of credit for payroll and stuff like that. So I went from being able to use that to automatically having to fulfill that with cash. So profitability as of right now is currently sitting just below where I was last year. I love to see a profitability operating between a 46 and 52%, which is really high for our industry. But as of right now, I think we're sitting at about 36.
All right. So, but think about this. If I just sum this up real quick and then we'll show our results. But your units are down like 18 units. So relatively based on the volume you've done, relatively small decrease in units. But the fact that the sales prices, the property prices continue to increase, that means your GCI actually kind of went up slightly because of those or stayed the same. And then just based on some factors with money and how that all worked out, the profit is down. But in a market where there's about 30 to 40% less homes being sold nationally, you guys have maintained a pretty consistent level. So I mean, that's pretty commendable from your management business.
Yeah, it required a lot of shifting. This was not a time of comfortability at all. This was a time of living in that uncomfortable state to find where we could adapt and change. And I talked about that quite a bit at Denver, that our market is different than it was a year ago. It's different than it was 6 months ago. And the evolution of even economists are stating that where we started out, we're going to be in a recession by mid-year. Now we're at the end of the year and we still haven't seen it, but everybody's still saying it's coming. I am reluctant to listen to national media because of that reasoning. It's easy to sell a headline. It's hard to actually put it into action.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to jump into some of that shifting. So that's what we're doing. So let's go ahead and share some results here. So as far as the audience goes, and I'm just going to pull this up so I can see it on my same screen as well. So we had 18% that said they're up. There's 64% when it comes to units that said they're down. So it sounds like a lot of people are in that same boat as you there. 18% said they're about the same, and none of them didn't know. So I was happy to hear that. That was good. Regarding the gross commission, wow, pretty close here. 45% said their GCI is up. 45% said their GCI is down. Only 9% said it's the same. And then finally, 27% said their profitability is up. 36% said the profitability was down, and 36% said it was the same. So yeah, we can kind of see a little bit of that shift with the profitability versus the units in the GCI. So I appreciate everyone sharing along those lines. So good.
Well, and I think that I mean, I don't want to call everybody out on the webinar, but this is where I do worry, is that there is probably a lot more of the don't knows than are willing to say the don't knows. This is the downside to our business, is that we get so caught up in production that we forget that there's a business to be run on the background. And that is something that it took me a long time. I talked about those failures. Some of those failures were epic because I was selling a lot of homes, but I wasn't being responsible. I was chasing the next big thing. And I chased a couple of those big things into a large amount of value. Zillow, when it came on as Premier Agent in 2012, I chased it to the tune of $9,000 a month before I realized that I was just being sucker punched into this large amount of money. And I had to make that decision that this was not the smart route for me to go. And I completely dynamically flipped my business on the other side. So be careful of that.
Yeah, and listen, that's it's just one example, right? And every market is different. Everyone's business is different. We know that. And so for one person in one market, the Zillow, programs can certainly work great, but for another person in another market, well, maybe there's a more efficient, more profitable way to go to market. And that's really what you're saying is you have to
Absolutely,
look at those for
because
you.
we use Zillow today, but we use it in a dynamic method that makes sense to us financially. That's my point, is that just be careful of the rabbit hole, because once you dive down it, you don't know how to get back out. And that's what happens is if you go too deep, you're stuck. And be careful, just keep a top of mind of that profitability, of your volume. Is we actually had this just happen last year. We're a flex team in our market, and flex actually ended up really changing some of that profitability is in the flex leads. Our flex leads actually replace some of our traditional leads where we're all organic. And because of that, because we're paying out 35% on a flex deal, we actually ended up with a lower profitability for the same amount of transactions. I
Wow.
didn't I didn't really take that into account, that I thought it would be an addition, but it ended up becoming a replacement. And that was something I, being very in tune with my business, missed completely until it was already too late.
So how did you figure that out? And I'm hoping it's going to be because of the amazing CRM that you're running your business off of with Sierra Interactive. But you have a large SOI and you have
Yeah.
a lot of folks in your CRM with Sierra. So what was that? What was your tell on that? How did you figure that out?
So it was a combination of looking at where our transactions were coming from, and then also identifying how they were integrated into other systems. So once again, I mean, between Sisu and Sierra, it really identified the fact of where our target closings were happening. So I could easily identify platforms that told me, hey, I'm getting more production from here, but I was getting more production from an organic or SOI or PCSOI. And then that shifted.
Mm.
And then I had to look at the profitability. So Profit First is my business Bible. I operated in a multitude of fashion. And that really kind of stems back from the richest man in Babylon and the concept that I need to pay myself first. I need to contribute to me first before I can start to contribute to everything else. And amazingly, I can be really successful with that. But I drifted because we all did. We got lazy. The last 3 years, we've got lazy. And I know some people will protest that, but we got to where fish were jumping in the boat. Well, we forgot how to fish. And now we need to figure out how to fish again.
Well, then let's kind of get into that, right? Because I think this is some of the great, philosophies and strategies that you've put in. We have to shift. We got lazy. We have to start to become more proficient and more, I would say, more purposeful in what we're doing. So tell me a little bit about some of those initiatives and changes and shifts that you've recently made in your business.
The biggest thing was accountability, and that was on my part, that was on my agent's part. Accountability came into play where we are a very heavy, rich lead generation. This is organic leads. This is Zillow leads. This is just our website leads. Our website generates a ton of activity, and we
So
don't put in.
let me just stop you there. So you have a Sierra IDX website connected to your Sierra, CRM, and you're developing from this through your SEO,
Yeah,
through your content, a ton of organic leads.
correct. So I
So
mean,
can
yeah,
I just put one more label on it? We call them free leads,
plug it.
right?
Yeah,
Free. So I got to put that on there. All right, keep going.
nothing in this world is free. I do pay a CRM expense, but
That's
I'm
true.
just putting
All right.
the okay. So we get a lot of leads, but the downside is that my agents became full of abundant mindset. They were getting so much that they were cherry picking. And what I found is that that led us to the pipeline where we are now dealt with. We have a lot of transactions going through. And we had a program that went through and looked at what we closed last year and what we didn't close last year. And we got a hard reality that there was a lot of transactions that we missed. And we missed them, in my opinion, is because we were so focused on the new incoming that we were missing the opportunities. So we went really deep and we started to figure out that the agents have to be held more accountable and I have to be held more accountable. So we immediately implemented a call requirement, and it has to be done in Sierra. It has to be through the recorded line. It has to happen every day. And that changed into just actually recently. So we were at 15 calls per day per agent. And then we just shifted that just recently up to 5 conversations per day, because a call is nothing without a conversation. So we just shifted it to 5 conversations a day.
So you started off by just kind of, and I want everyone to hear this, that's, that either has a team or just simply looking for a plan to put in place for themselves, just to enforce some discipline on themselves in the business, is that you walked before you ran. You started with just make 15 calls, dials. And then, we've heard this adage before that if it's not in the CRM, it doesn't exist, is kind of what we've heard. So by making them make the calls through Sierra, it's tracking them, it's recording it, as a conversation in Sisu if you guys work with them, and then additionally, you can record those calls and listen back and use them for coaching purposes. So first was just to make the calls, then it was to make contacts. So what did that do by changing that metric?
Well, so it is a new metric, but even just making the metric of the 15 phone calls changed us dramatically. It did 2 things. One, it made the agents be much more focused because we're an ISA team. So most of the appointments that were coming through were coming through from ISAs. And therefore, agents tend to think, well, the ISAs didn't do this, this, and this, and therefore they're not a good lead. But that was not the case. And we had to present that to them in the fact that now they need to see it the way it is. And that is, if they booked the appointment and the person didn't show up, just like they didn't with the ISAs, it wasn't anything more than the client didn't show up. Having them see that realization was dramatically changing. So that was a big one.
Wow. So this is awesome. I mean, so basically it's the walk in my shoes for a day and having them making these calls and having these appointments set like an ISA would. It wasn't the ISA making a mistake or not really qualifying it. They kind of got that perspective and it really helped the mindset.
Correct, 100%. And it also dramatically changed their mindset because they were coming in. Now we do our call session traditionally early morning. So we, the office opens at 9. We're here at 8. All the agents, no admin, no staff. All the agents are here at 8 making those phone calls. It's the easiest way that action breeds action. So listen, there are a lot of people that say, well, phone calling or cold calling is not something they want to do. And I understand that, but it's the evolution of the fact that I'd gotten lazy with the things that were made me successful in the past. I had to re-implement those. When I started the business, every morning I was at the office 7:00 in the morning. This is when we still had phone books, right? And I was looking up people's information. I didn't have Google to look up people's information. So I was going through and making these connections and making these calls at that time, but I drifted because it got simpler. And I was able to replace things with things like technology. And then it became more difficult. And now I got to get back to basics. And that was just the intent and the benefit.
Yeah. So then what I heard there too, just to make sure I'm repeating this, is that your agents are coming into the office, they're arriving by 8 a.m. and you guys are starting your call campaigns, at that point.
Correct. And that we just found that our call reception was better at 8 to 9 while people were in transition to work. Our other call golden hour, if you will, is that noon to 1:00. And then the final golden hour is operating in that range of about 5 to about 6, 7:30.
Wow. If that's not a piece of nugget gold right now. Hey, if you're going to lead generate for 3 hours throughout the day, right? Just to do the 3 hours of power, 8 to 9, noon to 1, and maybe sometime between that 5 and 7:30 range. That's great.
100%. Our answer rate is at those hours is about 40% bigger than whenever they're calling just randomly in the middle of the day.
That's powerful. So, all right. So it's one of the shifts, right? So you've shifted in that. And when you're calling those folks, I mean, are you calling leads? Are you calling your SOI? I mean, what's the mix?
So my 18, 19 years in the business has generated 60,000 plus contacts into my database. So my team gets direct access to my database, but I mentioned we also have a separate team that doesn't get access to database that still comes into office and works with us. They're just calling their database, and that's just a simple phone. They grab their phone, and I tell them, I said, guys, most people have anywhere from 100 to 1,000 contacts in their phone. Just call through that. Tell people that you're in real estate. You need to, if they need help, you're there to help. So just that simple connection, because people forget that you're in real estate, or they forget the value that you can bring to other people. I have a gut-wrenching story that my own sister in another market bought a house without letting me know to give her a referral, and I would have given her back the money. So it wasn't even a loss of income for me. It was a loss of something for her because I didn't translate well enough to her that I was the value that could bring more money to her bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like finding out that your friend or your brother and sister or sister-in-law bought a house, and same thing, right?
And we want to make it their fault. It's our fault for not translating. And that's, once again, we just got into this rhythm with this last 2 years, 3 years and that's the downside. A lot of real estate agents, most of my team are new within the last 3.5, 4 years. They don't understand the way the market is shifting. So it's my job to kind of translate that. But for those of you that don't have that translation, find those people that have the wisdom that did succeed in that market and know how to do it different. Because digital technology, it's all great, but it's a dangerous game because you got to be careful how much you expedite that part without the old traditional human connection.
So you've mentioned this to me, and you've said this a couple of times now, that you got to make technology work for you, not against you. And I think maybe you're touching on this now. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit more about what you mean about that?
Well, so we just you have to be careful that I make a point to cut up my credit card once a year, right?
I love this. I love this.
I cut it up once a year, and I just see who makes that phone call, who calls me and tells me, hey, by the way, your credit card didn't go through. And at that point, I get to tell myself, was this worth it? Was it not? Is it something that's providing value to me still? And if it's not, then I need to make the adjustment that says, sorry, guys, but I need to cancel that subscription. We get into credit carditis. We like to go swipe, swipe, swipe to see the next best thing. But sometimes we can evolve what we have already to be really beneficial to the bottom line. So what I mean by that very simply is if it's not making your job easier, or if you haven't used it, it's kind of the old, if you haven't picked it out of your closet and worn it in 6 months, you probably don't need it. And therefore you should probably get rid of it. That's the same thing here. If we haven't used it, or it's not helped us save money, or we haven't found a cheaper resource, that's the thing with the modern day technologies, it's going down in cost. But some of us are still stuck on old plans, and we got to be careful of those types of things.
That's smart. I love that. All right. So what other things have you shifted? Like what are some other ideas and strategies that way that that you want to share in that vein?
We've shifted heavy to the buying side of the transaction. So really getting nitty gritty on contract vernacular, knowing how to connect, knowing how to use it to your benefit, knowing when and how to. So one thing that's kind of gone away from the industry is the connection between realtor to realtor. We've become this mentality that it's us versus them when there's a fiduciary to the deal as well as a fiduciary to your client. And we forget that all too often. So getting back into the connection faction of, call that agent before you make the offer, communicate with that agent. Don't just ask them, what is it going to take? Talk to them, find out how their business is going, find out how your business is going, and communicate why you think this client would fit well into that situation. That's been a dramatic benefit to them. But we've had to shift to buyer sides winning those transactions when you have 10 offers or 4 offers or just one, but it needs to make sense to everybody in the deal. So
Yeah.
really get into that negotiation factor with the contract and with the other side of the transaction have been a large value add to us as of late.
So on that note, and again, if you don't have an opinion on this yet, I can appreciate that. But obviously we all know what's going on with the DOJ and the lawsuits and everything else like that. Have you guys started to take any actions of training on language of commissions and who gets paid? What have you guys been doing in that area?
So I actually saw this coming a while back because I heard somebody on a podcast talk about it in the way that made sense to me. And the 0% allowance that NAR has now allowed for MLSs to put a 0% compensation into the system terrifies me, but it also excites me because it allows that, once again, that environment where the people that have expertise will stand out and win amongst all those that don't. The expectation right now, they're talking large numbers, 1 to 1.2 million realtors will be out of the business because of this concession that they've allowed MLSs to do. My
Wow.
thought is, yeah, it's going to be massive, bloodbath, if you will. But I remember a bloodbath, and it was 2009. And you know what? That's where I actually had some of my best success. So because I mean, the old adage of easy times make easy men, or easy times make easy men, hard times make hard men. That's the concept. That right now we are in that hard time, and if we win through this, we're going to be a lot more successful. Back to the concept though, yes, we've been very intentional about our training to get our buyer specialists to understand, because we do specialize each side of our transaction. So to specialize on getting the compensation factor from the buyer, or at least making them aware that they may have to compensate from that. And we've been doing that for a while. So now I think as that becomes relative, we're already somewhat prepped for it, and using just a simple buyer's representation as a listing agent would use a listing, right? We don't market listings without a listing representation, but yet we'll go show buyers all day long without a buyer representation.
Well, right. And then that's kind of the new muscle that has to be flexed, right? Is if people would just meet people out there. It's the ALM model, right? Go and show and build that rapport. But I think, you start with that. And then after you need to get a commitment. Otherwise, there's not a win-win for both parties, especially with the change of compensation. So, well then, one other area that I just wanted to kind of, ask you about is you've diversified. You've not just stayed to straight real estate transactions. So tell me a little bit about what you've done to diversify your business.
Well, so there's a variety of different things. I mean, there is the adage of a brokerage type model with what EXP offers me. So there's an income there coming in from a rev share model that I used to have as a brokerage. So there's that method. There's the method that I have a property management company that I also own a piece of. So that's a value add, because once again, that used to be reciprocal. So when rentals were up, sales were traditionally down, and vice versa. But this is the first time in history that has actually been correlating. But as we were talking just before this, rentals have kind of stalled. We've seen 30% increases over the last 2 years, which brought a 30% in more
rent increases, so price increases, right?
Which means taking a percentage, we actually got 30% income boost over the last 2 years as well. So that was a great diversification. Now, the other side of that equation comes down to also keeping, we do house flips. We do a variety of different things, but I stay in my lane too. I stick to things that I know and I understand. So yes, I am very diversified, but I also make sure that it somewhat stays in my lane. So between property flips, between property holds, between like Airbnb, I never got into the Airbnb game because I didn't understand it. And I believe that I heard Warren Buffett say this a long time ago: I don't invest in anything I don't know inside and out. And that's the answer. It just doesn't make sense. If I don't understand it and I don't think it's a solid investment, I'm not going to make the move. I'm not going to criticize those that do, but I am going to say that I'm not going to make that. And everybody always asks, oh, why do you own all those rentals, but you don't do Airbnb? I was like, because I don't know it. And I never made the effort to know it. So it's not something I'm going to play with.
Yeah. So, I mean, not getting into too much personal information, but, I think that, one of the things that impressed me right away when we met was we kind of filled out our little worksheets that day at the summit from Coach AK, and you wanted to do your waterfall on some of the doors that you own and kind of pay them down. And it was, again, that profit mindset was there in that segment of your business, just like it was in the real estate side of your business. So I was super impressed by that as well.
Yeah, I'd rather have the concept of money working for me. Going back to that richest man in Babylon, listen, if I can have every bit of the money that I save work for me to create wealth over time, and I don't go out and splurge on it, it will turn into what is that value in the future. So that's what I've kind of always functioned on or tried to function on. There are times that become difficult. Like I said, there are always going to be variables that come into play, but if we play smart, I think we win.
It's great. I love it. So all right, so this is shiny, little jazzy, people love talking about it. So you were talking to me about some new AI that you were using that was pretty cool in your business. And you kind of talked about this at Sierra at the summit as well. So why don't you elaborate a little bit? Is it AI area AI? Am I getting it right?
So there's a couple of these. So this is that conversational AI. So like Sierra has a conversational AI for text, but this is now voice AI. And I was telling you about a conversation that I had with an AI bot for an expectation of almost 8, 9 minutes. And while I could understand that it was AI because I asked the right questions to ask it. I'll be honest, I would have critiqued that call way less than I may have critiqued one of my agent's calls. And I told my agents about this and they all freaked out. My ISA freaked out the most because they're like, you're going to replace us. I was like, I'm not going to replace you yet, but I need you to understand that you have to have that connection, because the one thing that AI doesn't have yet is the personal connection. They will get it. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be a point where they understand how to be emotional in the call. So being ahead of that game is key. So we're definitely interacting with it and going to implement it in certain places of our business, because I need to be prepared for it when it does hit. So that
So
is
what's the name of the one that you were playing around with?
the one we're playing around with is air.ai.
That's it. Okay. And then, so what you're telling me, the Air AI is conversational, and it can almost set an appointment for you or to confirm a showing or to do those types of activities.
All the above. It can do all those things. It's a little clunky because it's kind of like Chat GPT 3, but Chat GPT 4 is coming around the corner for this conversational AI, and it will be just a moment before it actually hits. So yeah, absolutely. That will be a massive hit to the market because people are going to use it at a lot. I mean, they're going to use it for outbound calling. It's kind of like text and direct mail. Think about it this way: when you've been in the business about the same amount of time as I have been, and the reality is that we started using direct mail, right? Hobbs Herder kind of pushed, hey, let's send out lots of stuff. And then direct mail got abused and everybody was doing it and you were getting this thing. And then they had this thing that said, so unsubscribe, 92 pounds, I think was what it was called. And you could unsubscribe from approximately 92 pounds of mail over the year. So then text got really popular. Everybody went to the conferences and they all said, text is the way of the future. And then we abused text until it was just ad nauseum. And now texts are killer. Well, then federal government says, hey, text
A2,
is not going to play.
A2P, there we go, right?
So they're going to lock that down. And now I've gotten a lot less text, except for political. It's amazing that political is the only extraction from that, but whole other story by itself. So text has been abused to the point of it can't be used anymore in that masked version. Well, guess what? Conversational AI is the next iteration. That's all it is. So what has happened each time? They revert back, right? Because now direct mail has actually been pretty productive for us. Text will probably become more productive for us in the future, but we need to be smart about how we do it. And we need to not, like I said, chase the penny, but we need to realize that no matter what, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, it still was the conversation that made sense. and the connection that made sense. As long as I'm your realtor, Scott, and you know it and I know it, and I'm in communication with you, and I don't let convenience get in the way of that, you're going to call me. But the moment I let you go to a barbecue and you don't remember who my name was, then I lost you. And that's
Right.
me.
Yeah. And that's it, right? I think what you're talking about there is truly just owning the relationship, almost through the life cycle of a person's, 5 to 7 homes that they buy throughout their lifetime, right? And that's what it comes down to.
They said that every client is worth, and this is a couple of years ago, so it's probably worth more, but every client is worth $125,000 of gross commission. That's through referrals. That's through their multiple transactions that they have with you. And we tend to worry only about the first one. And then we leave it and forget it. We have an adoption program in our system. So we have 2 neighborhoods that we've adopted. Any buyer that buys in that neighborhood, we adopt. We take over that buyer. We present ourselves as the market expert. We buy them a little mat in our, all those types of things. We do those things for them because their agent probably isn't. And that's pure and simple.
Yeah, and I think you kind of elaborated a little bit in the past when we talked about taking over a neighborhood and some of the things that you guys do, and it's kind of tied into the events and adopting a neighborhood. So maybe you just throw out a couple of the other examples that you guys do when you take over or adopt one of those neighborhoods.
Biggest one is that you adopt the schools that are in that neighborhood too. You become acquainted with the teachers, the capability, the opportunity. You buy t-shirts with your logo for the school teachers to be convenient, right? Listen, my wife's been a educator for 15, 20 years. And at that time, she gets these shirts and she brings them home. She wears them once and then they wash and they're just uncomfortable. So we bought nice, expensive shirts for the teachers. Guess what? They still wear them, and the school actually changed its name, and they still wear our shirts because of it. They're convenient, they're comfortable, but that's one. Adopting the teachers in those schools has been a massive benefit.
Mm.
Another one is, and I think the one that you're alluding to is that smoke alarms. They beep at you all the time, right? But if you buy a bunch of 9-volt batteries, you walk around the neighborhood and you say, hey, it's a national smoke alarm check your day, basically. And you just present them with, hey, how many smoke alarms do you have? Here are a couple batteries for you. Oh, by the way, we have somebody coming tomorrow that can install those for you. If you'd like, all you have to do is let us know. We'll put down for an appointment. The expense of this is minimal, but the value of it is tremendous because a lot of people, especially if it's a 2-story neighborhood where a lot of the houses are 2-story, they might have 13, 14-foot ceilings. And listen, I don't want to get up on a 14-foot ladder anymore. If I fall down, it's a bad day. Pay a contractor, let them crawl up the ladder and fix that battery. Minimal cost, tons of value.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. Well, that's awesome. If I had to summarize so far what we've kind of been talking about, it's shifting our behaviors, like getting in the office, 8 o'clock, making phone calls, shifting from dials to connections because we're getting back to basics of actually connecting with people on a human level. It's being able to get retrained and sharpen our tools, say in the buyer side where we were all focused on listings, but getting back to that buyer side, negotiating contracts, talking about our commissions, getting BBA signed. And these are all shifts that you've gone through. And in addition to diversifying, right? You have a model in the XP where there's a rev share component. You have flips that you work on. You have rental properties that you property manage. These are all areas that you've done to basically keep other revenue income streams coming in as the market kind of goes, this way or that. And then of course, not to mention cutting expenses out of things that are not necessarily useful in your business. I still think cutting up this credit card once a year is great. You don't know how many times, Brian, I get these charges that reoccur once a year and you forget about them. And all of a sudden, you get this $175 charge on the card and that you go to cancel it. You can cancel it, but it's not until next year you're canceling it. So being a good fiscal manager of your finances and your profitability. And then of course, embracing newer technologies like AI and this conversational AI through AI. Easy for me.
And there's one that's called Be Human. In this conversation right here, I can record one video one time, with a couple extra phrases, and it will translate that video personally to my entire database, but I only had to record it once. So it'll send the video out to all the people, personalized with their name and their information through this conversational or this AI transcription of my voice. That's a behuman.ai. That's a massive ad, right?
Is that
Video
the letter? Is it the letter B, or is it?
Yeah, I think it's BEHUMANAI.ai. So, but that's a value add that I can now use what everybody's talking about, right? Bomb was the bee's knees when it came out, and it still is, because it's, once again, connection. Now, this is the scary part of the whole situation. I had this conversation with my team just recently, is that they are taking over these methods, because right now people don't know that it could be a recorded version, right? But they will eventually. So it's worthwhile today, but there needs to be a time when I understand that it's now sounding like, am I just another robot? At that moment, I got to make the shift at that stage. I can't wait till it gets too deep into it. And that's what people tend to do. They tend to over abuse too deep, and they've already put themselves into a bind.
Yeah, just like everything else we've talked about today, from the texting to the direct mail to, everyone calling, right, on expired listings and for sale by owners through the system. So that's fantastic. That's a pattern that you have to see coming and be proactive to change. Awesome. Well, what else did I miss? Anything else that you wanted to summarize from the talk out in Denver that we didn't touch on?
Yeah, the biggest thing is, don't be afraid of your value add to people. Okay. Listen, a lot of people tend to have this conversation that says, I did a lot of transactions and I was successful. That doesn't always correlate. And you need to be careful of that. Sometimes less transactions can be more profitable for you. So be careful to understand your business. The second big thing is also make sure that you're using the free techniques. Do seminars. You're a professional. Qualify professionals into your business. Use things like, hey, if you don't want to make cold calls out, send out a little letter. Write a letter that says, hey, I'm inviting you to a CPA meeting to talk about taxes this year, or to talk about property taxes. People hate property taxes. I'm in Texas. Property taxes are ridiculous, and I just got my bill. Right now, we are putting a direct campaign in play to talk about how to fight your property taxes next year, because it's relevant.
Yep.
Now, that intention is not to help them in the future. That intention is to bring top of mind that I'm an expert when it comes to property taxes that you hate and you want to get out of your house. But I'm offering the solution for the future. And that's the benefit of what I get from it. So qualify these things, put these things in aspect. You know the business. Texas is a homestead state. Well, make sure you filed your homestead, because if you didn't file your homestead, guess what? You're paying more taxes than you should. Let me help you do we get so much value from simply sending out notices to people that have closed that say, I don't charge for it. Come into our office and we'll help you fill out the form.
Well, hey, there's a
all the time.
Perfect example. So we have behavioral triggers in Sierra that can start from a certain date, and actually your transaction close date is actually one of those behavioral triggers. And or simply just a calendar trigger. If you close during the month or the year of 2023, that you need to file your homestead by April 15th. So you could trigger all of those people to get a notice or an email or something from you to remember to do something like that.
100%. And one thing I will say about Sierra in general is that people tend to not fill out fields. Okay. And what I mean by this is that you have a ton of fields that are in there, things like birth date, anniversary date, things like that. But people don't fill them out because they're like, I don't need it right now. But when you do need it, it becomes a pain in the butt to track it down. One of the things that I was taught a long time ago in my first job out of college was fill out every field that's available, because you'll never know when you're going to need it. And it's paid off in dividends over the years, because the same thing. How many people, I would venture to say, don't even change the status on their leads when they close them? This is a value add that you can work on and qualify and put into so many value points. And most people don't do it. It's unfortunate.
Well, I'll even go back to another area is, using, say, our tags. So if you lost someone and for some reason they didn't buy, making sure you have a set of tags that identifies why they didn't work with you. Was it they chose another agent? Was it they were not qualified in their financing? Was it the fact that they decided not to relocate, right? Because you can go back and sort those people and kind of do re-engagement campaigns later based on having that data collected up front, right? Whereas to your point, if you don't collect it up front, then
Okay.
you can't go back and do a new campaign to kind of cycle back to say, hey, did things change? Did you get a new job? Is your financing improved? Or whatever the circumstances, that you're filtering for. So absolutely.
Tons of people still use MLS searches when they have a program like Sierra. And that shocks me because literally we're not keeping them in our, the reason you mentioned earlier, yeah, I get a lot of organic leads. Google likes website traffic, which means if I get good website traffic from an email of an e-alert, then that builds my platform. But then they'll send them to, yeah, they'll send them to MLS. And guess what? That doesn't benefit you at all. And it's just, it shocks me. And they say it's easier. Yeah, it may be a little bit easier, but it's not enough to take away from what you would earn if they came back to your site.
Well, yeah, you bring up a great point. And, just to know, and number one is that we work with the local MLSs when we set up an IDX so that our search criteria that's available inside of Sierra mirrors the MLS. It's probably closer than most any other MLSs out there. And so you can get very, very granular when it comes to searching, whether it's a 55 plus, neighborhood, or if it's a, certain lot size. So you can do almost those exact same things. You can search by schools in Sierra. A lot of MLS or a lot of other systems don't allow you to do that. And then we also have a map search that you can literally draw. So you can pick the area of the city that they want to be in that might cross multiple zip codes, but it doesn't include the entire zip code, right? So you can get very, very granular with your searches within Sierra. And then the reason why like to your point, why that's so important is number one, those emails going out, but also you get to see behind the scenes what properties they're looking at, how often they're opening your e-alerts, and those then create triggers or behavioral triggers that create tasks into to-dos and follow-ups that help an agent manage their active database of searching for homes. So yeah, sorry, went off on my tangent there, but it's a huge benefit of what we do. So
you got to use the tools that you do have because you tend to buy tools. I'll use one for instance. I heard a lot of people talking about Forewarn, right? And these other platforms, but a lot of MLSs offer a version of that or even offer Forewarn in the system, and people forget that they're there. Your MLS probably has a ton of tools that you just don't use. Remind being one of the biggest losses to a lot of people. Most people have access to Remind through their MLS, and they don't use it. And it shocks me because this is a literal prospecting tool if you use it appropriately. But you got to crack it open. You got to know how to use it. And yet you'll go out and spend money on all these other platforms, but you won't use what you have accessible for you right now. And that drives me insane.
Well, hey, that's funny. It's funny. I had a conversation with an associate last night in Houston, and we were talking about the triangulation of data for sellers and how you can take a Revaluate, which is a tool that we do offer through Sierra. And I know you're familiar with Revaluate. I think there's the kick in the pants analogy we talked about at one point. And then you can then take your Remind data and look at people who've been in their house for 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years. And you can kind of lay those two pieces of data over the top of each other and give yourself a little bit more of a clue as to who's potentially ready to make a move from time in house or equity or all the above.
Well, and don't jump straight to the expense, right? Some people will say, well, I'm going to buy a Mojo dialer. Mojo dialer is $100 a month. Don't buy a Mojo dialer. Take your phone out, take your Sierra list out, and just make the phone calls independently through the list that came from Remind. You don't have to pay for that data. It's already accessible. And people tend to do this a lot. They go for the easy route. When you go for the easy route, you tend to get the easy result, meaning that you get the result that's not going to be the maximized exposure for benefit, profit, everything else. Sometimes you got to do a little work in this business to be successful, and keeping your expenses down is one of those things.
Yeah, and like what you're referencing there is in Sierra, you can build a list. It's called a bulk action. You can put, 50 people in your list, and then you launch the dialer, and you can do it through your cell phone, or you can do it through the actual connection of your PC or your Mac, and you can roll through those calls, and it's no extra charge. It's part of the dialer that's built into your Sierra, as opposed to doing a Vulcan or a Mojo or one of those other tools. So totally get it.
Correct. And qualify yourself to the next tool. Before you ever make that decision, say, is it going to bring enough value that it makes sense? And if it does, then it does. If it doesn't, then don't do it. Plain and simple.
Awesome. Well, great. I mean, this was amazing. I mean, some great takeaways from today. Really appreciate you coming on and spending this time and sharing these insights and these strategies with our Sierra user database today.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate it as well.
All right. Good to see you again. And till next time, have a great one. And hey, guys, if this was a use for you, please don't forget to share it out to anyone else that might be able to benefit this. If you have any other ideas or topics that you really want us to narrow on in the future, you can send that to hello sierrainteractive.com. It's hello at sierrainteractive.com. And we'll catch you in about 2 weeks. Thanks again, Bri.
Thank you.
Take care.